The great hall of the Galactic Council sparkled with bioluminescent crystals, casting a soft blue glow over the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds. For James Miller, the first human ambassador to the Council, it felt like walking into a dream. He straightened his plain black suit, a stark contrast to the flowing, shimmering robes worn by the alien delegates. The other species avoided looking at each other, their eyes downcast or covered with translucent membranes. They communicated through gentle pulses of telepathic energy, a subtle dance of thoughts that humans couldn't perceive. James, however, did what came naturally to him. He looked directly at everyone he passed. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the gathering. Many delegates shifted away, their tentacles or appendages twitching nervously. To them, his direct gaze felt like a physical touch, an intimate gesture that broke all protocols of polite society. The human representative will now be presented to Princess Lyra, heir to the Stellar Empire, announced the Master of Ceremonies, his voice echoing in multiple harmonics. James approached the floating platform where Princess Lyra sat. She was humanoid, but her skin had a subtle purple sheen, and her hair seemed to float as if underwater, each strand ending in a point of light. Like the others, she kept her eyes half closed, communicating through the standard telepathic channels. Following Earth's diplomatic protocols, James bowed and then looked directly at her. "Greetings, Your Highness. Earth is honored to join the Galactic Council." The moment their eyes met, something extraordinary happened. Princess Lyra's eyes widened, their silver irises expanding. The lights in her hair flared brightly, and a faint blush spread across her purple-tinted cheeks. No one had ever looked at her this way, with such openness, such directness. You look at me," she said out loud, breaking protocol by using verbal communication. Her advisors gasped. "How can you be so bold?" James blinked, confused. On Earth, it's polite to make eye contact when speaking to someone. It shows respect and attention. A wave of shocked whispers, both telepathic and verbal, swept through the hall. Looking directly at royalty, showing respect through aggressive optical contact. Unthinkable. Princess Lyra found herself unable to look away from his brown eyes. They were warm, honest, and completely unguarded. In a society where everyone hid their thoughts behind careful telepathic filters, this raw openness was both frightening and thrilling. "Fascinating," she said, leaning forward on her floating throne. "Please tell me more about these human customs." Her chief advisor, a tall being with crystalline skin, stepped forward. "Your Highness, the schedule." "Can wait," Lyra finished, still holding James's gaze. "We have much to learn about our new friends." James noticed the other delegates watching their interaction with a mixture of horror and curiosity. Some seemed scandalized by the princess's interest in primitive human ways. Others appeared intrigued by this new form of communication. Over the next hour, as James explained basic human greetings and customs, he realized something important. Despite their advanced technology and telepathic abilities, these aliens had lost something essential: the ability to connect through simple, direct interaction. Princess Lyra absorbed every word, occasionally meeting his eyes before quickly looking away, like someone unaccustomed to bright light. Each time their gazes met, the lights in her hair would pulse brighter, and that strange blush would return to her cheeks. "Perhaps," she said finally, "there is more to learn from Earth than we expected." As James left the Great Hall that day, he heard the delegates already buzzing with gossip about the strange human who dared to look at the princess, and the even stranger princess who seemed fascinated by it. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a change that would reshape galactic society. The guards at the door flinched when James nodded goodbye to them, but one, after a moment's hesitation, nodded back. A small gesture, but on that day, it felt like the start of something revolutionary. Something as simple as a human's gaze was about to turn the galaxy upside down. Princess Lyra sat in her private chamber, surrounded by floating holographic screens displaying information about Earth. Her usual grace forgotten, she leaned forward eagerly, scrolling through images of humans, making eye contact during conversations, business meetings, and social gatherings. Fascinating, she whispered, watching a video of two humans maintaining eye contact while sharing a meal. They do this all the time. The door chimed, and her advisor, Lord Ray, entered. His crystalline form caught the light from the screens, sending rainbow patterns across the walls. Your Highness, the Council is concerned about your interest in human customs. Lyra didn't look away from the screens. She had spent 3 days studying human behavior, barely sleeping. Did you know they have something called body language? They can tell so much just by looking at each other's faces and movements. Princess, Ray's tone grew stern. Making eye contact is considered primitive. It's dangerous. Humans are unpredictable because they rely on physical senses instead of proper telepathic communication. Just then, another screen lit up with a live feed from the diplomatic quarter. James Miller was walking through the garden, looking up at the floating crystal trees with obvious wonder. As usual, other delegates hurried out of his path, disturbed by his direct gaze. Lyra found herself touching the screen, tracing the outline of his face. Look how honest his expressions are. No telepathic filters, no hidden meanings. Just pure emotion. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. Ray protested. They have no control, no refinement. Yesterday, the human looked directly at the trade minister's spawn mate. The poor thing fainted. Lyra laughed, a sound rarely heard in the Crystal Palace, because we've forgotten how to connect without telepathy. We hide behind our mental shields and proper protocols. But humans... She paused, watching James help a small alien child who had dropped its hover toy. They connect through something more basic, more real. Ray's crystalline form darkened with concern. The Council wants to restrict human interaction with other species. They suggest keeping them isolated on their own planet. No. Lyra stood up suddenly, her hair lights flashing with anger. I won't allow it. We invited them to join the Galactic Council. We can't discriminate against them because their ways are different. Your Highness. A new alert flashed on her screens. James was approaching the palace for his scheduled cultural exchange meeting. Lyra's hair lights brightened automatically, and she smoothed her shimmering robes. That will be all, Ray, she said firmly. The advisor left, his crystal form clouded with worry. In the corridor, he met James, who smiled and nodded politely. Ray hurried past, but not before noticing how those human eyes seemed to see right through his carefully maintained telepathic shields. Inside the meeting room, Lyra waited nervously. When James entered, she forced herself to meet his gaze, fighting years of ingrained protocol. Her heart beat faster as those brown eyes found hers. Your Highness, James bowed. I've been studying Earth customs, she said quickly. You also shake hands as greeting, yes? James looked surprised but pleased. Yes, we do. Lyra extended her hand, trying to copy the videos she'd watched. When James's warm hand touched hers, she gasped. Physical contact was even rarer than eye contact in her society. Too forward? James asked, concerned. No, Lyra said, marveling at the simple touch. It's perfect. Tell me more about how humans connect with each other. As they talked, neither noticed the palace sensors recording their interaction, nor the council members watching with growing alarm. To them, this scene, a princess of the stellar empire engaging in primitive physical greetings with a human, was more than shocking. It was revolutionary. And revolutions, as both James and Lyra would soon learn, were not always welcome in the carefully ordered society of the Galactic Council. But for now, in that quiet room, two beings from vastly different worlds shared something rare in the galaxy, a moment of genuine, unfiltered connection. The emergency alarms blared through the Galactic Council chambers, their harmonic tones making the crystal walls vibrate. A group calling themselves the Pure Thoughts had taken control of 3 major space stations in the Outer Rim. Their demand was simple: remove all primitive species from the Council, starting with humans. James Miller stood before the council, his calm gaze moving from one delegate to another. Most still flinched at his direct eye contact, but a few had started to return his looks, if only briefly. The pure thoughts refused telepathic communication, reported Admiral Vex, his holographic form flickering with stress. They blocked all standard diplomatic channels. Then perhaps, James said quietly, it's time to try something different. Princess Lyra, sitting on her floating platform, looked up sharply. Over the past weeks, she had grown better at maintaining eye contact, though it still made her hairlights flicker wildly. What do you suggest? She asked, ignoring the disapproving murmurs from other council members. Let me speak to them, in person. No telepathy, no filters, just direct communication. The council erupted in chaos. The idea of handling a crisis without telepathic protocols was unheard of. Several delegates began floating away in protest. You can't be serious. Lord Ray's crystal form darkened. It's too dangerous. They might look at him. Lyra stood up, her voice cutting through the chaos. Exactly. That's what we need. Our old ways aren't working. We need to try something new. 2 hours later, James's ship approached the main rebel station. Princess Lyra had insisted on coming along, despite fierce opposition from her advisors. She watched in fascination as James prepared for the meeting by doing nothing. No mental shields, she asked. No diplomatic filters. James smiled. Just honesty. Sometimes the simplest approach is the best. The rebel leader, a tall being made of shifting smoke, waited in the station's main hall. Like his followers, he wore a device that blocked telepathic signals. You dare bring a human here? The leader's voice crackled with energy. James stepped forward, looking directly into the swirling patterns that served as the rebel's eyes. I came to talk. No telepathy, no games, just truth. The smoke being wavered, unused to such direct interaction. You're not afraid to look at me. On Earth, looking away is often seen as a sign of dishonesty, James explained. I want you to know that everything I say is true. For the next hour, James talked about Earth, about human ways of building trust through openness. He maintained eye contact, used clear hand gestures, and spoke with genuine emotion. The rebel leader, at first hostile, began to lean forward, fascinated by this direct form of communication. Princess Lyra watched in amazement as the rebels gradually lowered their telepathic blockers. James's honest approach was breaking through centuries of rigid protocol and fear. Perhaps, the rebel leader finally said, his smoke form settling into a calmer pattern, we have been too quick to judge different ways of thinking and seeing. Later, as their ship headed back to the council, Lyra found James looking out at the stars. You did it, she said, deliberately meeting his eyes. You showed them that different doesn't mean dangerous. James turned to her, his warm gaze making her hairlights pulse with that now familiar glow. Sometimes people just need to be seen. Really seen. The council will have to acknowledge this, Lyra said. Your way of communication. It's powerful. It's not just my way anymore. James smiled, nodding at how confidently she now held his gaze. You've learned it too. What neither of them knew was that this crisis had been just the beginning. The success of human-style direct communication would soon spark larger changes throughout the galaxy, changes that some would do anything to prevent. But for now, they shared a moment of triumph, their eyes meeting in understanding, as the stars streaked past in endless rivers of light. The secret meeting chamber deep beneath the Crystal Palace was thick with tension. James sat quietly, watching Princess Lyra pace the room, her hairlights flashing with anger. The security recordings she had just shown him were disturbing. Council members in secret meetings, plotting to restrict human influence in the galaxy. They call it the Veil Protocol, Lyra said, her voice trembling. They want to force all humans to wear special visors that prevent eye contact. They claim it's for cultural sensitivity, but it's really about control, James finished, his steady gaze following her movement. After months on the council world, he had learned to read the subtle changes in her bioluminescence. Right now, she was both angry and afraid. My own advisors are part of it. She gestured at another recording showing Lord Ray meeting with representatives from distant systems. They're afraid because more species are starting to adopt human customs. Did you know the Trading Guild now encourages eye contact during negotiations? They say it reduces deception by 40%. James stood up, approaching a holographic display of the proposed visor design. They're right to be afraid. Not of humans, but of change. Your society has relied on telepathic control for thousands of years. Direct communication threatens that power structure. A soft chime warned them of approaching footsteps. Lyra quickly shut down the holograms, but not before James caught a glimpse of another file labeled Operation Blindfold. Lord Ray entered, his crystalline form perfectly polished. He stopped short at seeing James and Lyra standing so close together. Your Highness, the Council requests your presence. Alone. James noticed how Ray's crystal segments shifted slightly, a tell he had learned to recognize as deception. He kept his face neutral but made deliberate eye contact with the advisor. Ray flinched, his crystal form briefly clouding. Whatever the Council needs to say, Lyra declared, they can say it in front of the human ambassador. Protocol demands. Ray began. Protocol. Lyra laughed sharply. Like the protocol of secret meetings to discriminate against council members. Ray's form went completely opaque, the equivalent of a caught liar's pale face. I don't know what you mean. James stepped forward, maintaining steady eye contact with Ray. Interesting. Your crystal structure clouds when you're being dishonest. I noticed it in council meetings, but I thought I was imagining things. The advisor backed away, his form shifting rapidly between transparency and opacity. This is exactly why humans are dangerous. They see too much. They don't respect proper barriers. No, Lyra said firmly. They see the truth. That's what terrifies you. Suddenly, the room's lights flickered. Emergency signals pulsed through the crystal walls. Ray's form solidified into a smug pattern. I'm sorry, Your Highness, but we cannot allow this contamination to continue. The Veil Protocol must be implemented for the good of galactic society. Security drones buzzed into the room, surrounding James with a containment field, but they had underestimated what he had learned about their technology and about their species' inability to maintain eye contact. James looked directly at the drone operators through their video feeds. One by one, they looked away, their telepathic control wavering just enough for Lyra to send a counter-signal. The drones dropped to the floor, deactivated. You see, James said to Ray, who was backing toward the door, direct communication isn't just about seeing. It's about being seen. Something your perfect society seems to have forgotten. Lyra stepped forward, her hair lights now pulsing with a steady, determined glow. The Council needs to learn that you can't blind the truth by hiding it behind protocols and telepathic filters. As Ray fled the room, James and Lyra shared a knowing look. They had discovered the conspiracy, but exposing it to the galaxy would be far more challenging. They would need every human skill and every growing connection between them to succeed. The battle for the galaxy's future would be fought not with weapons, but with the simple, revolutionary power of an open gaze. The grand ballroom of the Crystal Palace sparkled with 1,000 floating lights. Delegates from across the galaxy danced in their traditional way, without touching, moving in carefully choreographed patterns while sharing telepathic pleasantries. Princess Lyra stood out in two shocking ways. First, she wore Earth-style formal dress instead of the traditional floating robes. Second, she was actually touching her dance partner, James Miller, as they moved in a simple Earth waltz. The council members look like they're about to faint, James whispered, guiding her through another turn. His hand was warm against her waist, sending pleasant tingles through her bioluminescent nervous system. Let them look, Lyra replied, meeting his eyes with growing confidence, Her hair lights pulsed in time with the music. We need to show them that change isn't something to fear. Across the room, Lord Ray watched with a group of high-ranking officials. Their disapproval radiated in waves of telepathic energy, so strong that nearby crystal decorations vibrated. "The human has too much influence," one official muttered. "The princess actually touches him. In public. It will be handled." Ray's crystal form gleamed with dark purpose. Tonight. The dance continued, with more couples watching James and Lyra. A few younger delegates looked curious, even interested. One brave pair moved closer together, almost touching. Then everything went wrong. The lights flickered. A high-pitched whine filled the air. James, trained to notice details, saw a small drone zip through the crowd. Its targeting laser pointed directly at Lyra's heart. Without thinking, James spun her around, pulling her close. The drone's stun blast hit his back instead of her chest. He gritted his teeth against the pain but kept his eyes locked on Lyra's. "Security breach," someone shouted. The room erupted in chaos. James, Lyra supported his weight as his legs weakened from the stun blast. "Guards, we need help." But the guards seemed confused, receiving conflicting telepathic orders. Some moved to help, others held back. Through blurring vision, James saw Ray's crystal form flicker with satisfaction. The pieces clicked together. "Look at him," James managed to tell Lyra. "Really look." Lyra turned her gaze on Ray, really looking as humans did, seeing past telepathic shields to physical tells. Ray's crystal form clouded under her direct stare, revealing his guilt. "Arrest Lord Ray," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "For attempted assassination." The guards, faced with a direct verbal order and the princess's unwavering gaze, moved to comply. Ray tried to flee but found himself surrounded. "You don't understand." Ray's voice crackled with desperation. "The human way is spreading. Soon, everyone will be looking, touching, expressing emotions openly. Our whole society will collapse." "No," Lyra said firmly, still supporting James. "It will evolve. The old ways won't disappear, but they'll make room for new ones." In the aftermath, as medical drones treated James's injury, news spread quickly through the galaxy. Images of the human ambassador taking a blast meant for the princess went viral on telepathic networks. Even more shocking were pictures of their dance, showing direct eye contact and physical touch. "They'll use this against us," James said later in the medical bay, his back still tingling from the blast. "Say it proves humans are dangerous, that we're corrupting your culture." Lyra sat beside his bed, holding his hand openly, no longer caring who saw. "Let them try. You saved my life because you were watching, really seeing what was happening. The old ways of hiding behind telepathic protocols, they nearly got me killed." Their eyes met, both seeing the deeper truth. The assassination attempt had failed, but it marked the beginning of real conflict. The galaxy was changing, and change never came without resistance. "Rest," Lyra said softly, her hair lights glowing with warm colors. "Tomorrow, we show the council that looking away from change doesn't make it stop. Sometimes, you have to look directly at the future you want." James squeezed her hand, their shared gaze saying more than telepathy ever could. The great council chamber, once a place of quiet telepathic exchange, echoed with spoken words and direct declarations. Half the delegates now made eye contact openly, while others huddled behind enhanced telepathic shields, horrified by the breakdown of traditional protocols. James stood before them all, his bandages from the assassination attempt still visible under his formal suit. Princess Lyra stood beside him, her hand clasped firmly in his, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. "The evidence is clear," James's voice rang out. "Lord Ray and his conspirators planned to force humans to wear blinding visors. When that failed, they tried to kill Princess Lyra to stop the spread of human customs. Because these customs are destroying our society," shouted a delegate from the conservative systems. "Look around. Delegates making eye contact, speaking aloud, even touching. It's chaos. No, Lyra stepped forward, her hair lights blazing with determination. It's freedom. Freedom to choose how we connect with each other. The chamber erupted in a mix of verbal and telepathic arguments. Young delegates faced off against their elders. Species that had never spoken aloud were finding their voices. Order. The High Chancellor's telepathic command boomed through the chamber. This must be decided by proper protocol. All in favor of banning human customs. Project your thoughts. Wait, James said firmly, looking directly at the Chancellor. If we're voting on human customs, let's use human methods. Let everyone look each other in the eye and speak their truth. Gasps filled the room. The Chancellor's form shimmered with outrage. You dare suggest? I support this, came a voice from the Trading Guild. Their representative stood up, making deliberate eye contact with others. Since adopting human negotiation styles, our trade disputes have decreased by 60%. More delegates stood. The medical coalition spoke of better patient care through direct observation. The Education Council reported improved learning outcomes when teachers engaged students visually. This is rebellion. The conservative leader's telepathic cry made the crystals shake. We cannot abandon thousands of years of tradition. Not abandon. Lyra corrected, her gaze steady. Expand. Grow. Learn new ways while honoring the old. The chamber's energy shifted as more delegates rose, choosing sides. Those supporting change moved to stand with James and Lyra, while traditionalists clustered around the Chancellor. If you continue this, the Chancellor warned, you risk civil war. Many systems will never accept these primitive customs. James stepped forward, his calm gaze meeting the Chancellor's hidden eyes. Then let them keep their traditions. We're not forcing anyone to change. We're asking for the freedom to choose. Choice itself is the danger, another conservative member cried. Choice leads to chaos. No, Lyra's voice rang out. Choice leads to understanding. Look at me. Really look. I can still use telepathy, still honor our old ways. But I can also do this. She turned to James, their eyes meeting in that special way that had started all this change. Her hair lights danced with colors that everyone could see, expressing emotions more clearly than any telepathic projection. One by one, younger delegates began removing their telepathic dampeners. Some tried making eye contact for the first time. A few even dared to shake hands, laughing nervously at the new sensation. The Chancellor watched his authority crumbling as more and more delegates chose to express themselves openly. This means war, he declared. The conservative systems will not stand for this contamination. Then look away, James said simply. But you can't blind everyone else to the future. As the chamber divided between those embracing change and those fighting it, James and Lyra shared a knowing look. The real battle was just beginning. But they had already won something precious, the right to choose how to connect, how to communicate, how to see and be seen. The revolution of the gaze had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year after the Great Council split, the galaxy was a very different place. The conservative systems had isolated themselves behind telepathic barriers, but they were slowly losing influence as more worlds embraced the freedom to choose their own ways of communication. James stood at the window of his new office in the reformed Galactic Council building, watching ships from different worlds dock at the spaceport. Many now carried mixed crews, some using traditional telepathy, others practicing human-style direct communication, all working together, thinking deep thoughts. Lyra's voice came from behind him. He turned to see her enter, wearing a modified version of traditional robes that allowed for easier movement. Her hair lights glowed with the warm colors that he had learned meant happiness. Just appreciating how much has changed, he smiled, meeting her eyes naturally. Remember when everyone ran away from my gaze? Now they're running towards it, she laughed, joining him at the window. The Integration Academy can't keep up with all the species wanting to learn human communication styles. They watched as a group of young delegates practiced below, some making careful eye contact, others learning human facial expressions. Even a few crystalline beings like Lord Ray's species were there, learning to maintain transparency as a sign of honesty, rather than hiding behind opaque forms. The conservative systems sent another protest, James said, showing her the message on his tablet. They say we're corrupting the purity of galactic culture. They said the same thing when we got married last month. Lyra smiled, taking his hand. Their wedding had been revolutionary, combining traditional telepathic bonding with human vows and eye contact. It had been broadcast across the galaxy, inspiring countless other couples to blend different cultural practices. A chime announced visitors. A young diplomatic team entered, a mix of telepathic and verbal communicators. Their leader, a being of pure energy, had modified their form to include visible eyes. Ambassador Miller, Princess Lyra. They spoke both verbally and telepathically. The Reformed Council is ready for your presentation on the next phase of integration. In the council chamber, James and Lyra faced their audience. Some still used telepathic shields, but most now practiced what had become known as dual communication, blending traditional and new methods. A year ago, we stood here divided, James began, his gaze moving across the chamber. No one flinched anymore. Now we stand here stronger, not because we all communicate the same way, but because we respect each other's choices. Lyra continued, her hair lights projecting supportive patterns. The Integration Academy has graduated its first 1,000 teachers. They'll help more worlds understand that different isn't dangerous. That seeing can mean both telepathic and visual connection. The chamber filled with a mixture of spoken and telepathic approval. A delegate from the former conservative systems spoke up. Even my world is considering opening an academy branch. Our young ones, they want to learn all ways of understanding each other. As the session continued, James reflected on how far they'd come. What had started with a simple human gaze had grown into a movement that transformed galactic society, not by forcing change, but by offering choice. Later that evening, James and Lyra stood on their balcony, watching the 3 moons rise. Her hair lights created a gentle aurora around them. "Do you ever miss the old ways?" he asked softly. The quiet of pure telepathic communication. Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes meeting his brown ones with all the confidence of practice. "Sometimes, but I wouldn't trade this for anything. The ability to choose how I connect, to show my feelings both inside and out." She demonstrated by letting her hair lights flash the patterns that meant, "I love you," while also saying it aloud and sending it telepathically. James smiled, responding with words and touch, and his steady, honest gaze. Above them, ships from across the galaxy streaked through the sky, carrying beings who were learning that understanding comes in many forms. That love, trust, and connection transcend any single way of communicating. And it all began with a human's gaze and a princess brave enough to look back. The end.